Highlander is an Alpine style cheese, like I mentioned. So when I talk about cheese making in the Alps, part of it is, you know, we're mimicking those dry hay pastures, but also in the Alps, they used to take the cows up out of the lowlands so they could grow crops down below. So they bring the cows to the places where they couldn't grow crops, where the cows could harvest those beautiful alpine meadows, grasses, high alpine grasses. And then they would have to like make cheese sort of while camping. They'd have these like wooden huts, and they would, you know, take the whole village's cows up there, milk them twice a day, and make like a cheese after each milking. One big cheese, like Comte and Gruyere, like 80-pound wheels, and they're like 4 feet across. And it was the size of the bottom of the copper cauldron they were making the cheese in. And they would do that because a nice big cheese lasts a long time. They're trying to make food for the winter. They're kind of like easier to store instead of like juggling all of these little wheels. And they were, you know, stocking the larders of the village instead of making little cute cheeses that you could go and sell at a market one at a time. So that the big format worked for them. And in order to get a big cheese dry enough so that it wouldn't kind of like rot in the middle, they needed to get moisture out of the curd, and kind of the fastest way to do that in your wooden hut on the side of a mountain is to build a fire under your cauldron. Cooking the curd helps dry it down, helps kind of like shrink them up and squeeze out the moisture. And it also imparts kind of like a cooked cheese flavor. And that fast make results in not a lot of acidity being produced during cheese making. When you make cheese, you're turning the lactose, the sugar in cheese, into lactic acid with your starter cultures. And the longer your make process, the more tangy and acidic your cheese gets, and the more crumbly the texture gets. And so a quicker make tends to be less acidic, sweeter, and more bendy. I mentioned, you know, the longer the make, the more acidity, the more crumbly it gets. You're dissolving away the calcium glue in a more acidic make that gives you this nice elastic texture. So this wedge of cheese, let's see if I can give you an impression. It doesn't crumble and break. It really bends. This is a beautifully bendy cheese. And in fact, at a certain point in the make process, we wash away some of the whey with that active lactose making acid and replace it with just plain warm water to kind of slow down the acidity. It's called a washed curd cheese. So this is kind of a medium elevation cheese. That the recipe and the technique and the texture we're going for is really similar to raclette, the French cheese that you would put half wheels under an iron from the fire and melt the surface and scrape it onto a plate of potatoes and pickles and charcuterie. It's a great suggestion of what to do with Highlander. Get yourself some like delicious prosciutto and some cornichon and crusty bread or boiled potatoes, and that's like a whole dinner. What more do you need? So Highlander is our first cheese made with, one of our first cheeses made with goat's milk. So you see these cute goat faces here. Annie and Ryan are goat farmers. They were in California. They were actually worked for years for one of the pioneers of the American goat cheese movement, Cypress Grove. And Cypress Grove got to a certain point in their business. They wanted to build this big, beautiful, well-scaled, modern goat farm. And Annie and Ryan, Ryan in particular worked directly for Cypress Grove, helped them get that farm designed and built and run and dialed in. And then there came a point where Ryan really, you know, wanted kind of his own stake in the game, wanted his own farm. He'd been keeping an eye on a herd of goats in Vermont. And he noticed when they went up for sale, because the family wanted to retire, the Oak Knoll Dairy in Windsor, Vermont. And this herd of goats is beautifully bred genetics wise, very low incidence of any of the sort of problems you can have with goats. 3 different breeds sort of mixed together, a closed herd, meaning that the genetics are staying from within. And so they took the plunge, moved to Vermont for the opportunity to work with these goats. We wanted to make goat cheeses. We have had a farm in town that had just gone out of business. We wanted to make sure it didn't go away forever or get developed. And so we went 50-50 with them. We bought the goats and the old cow farm, and then we worked together with them to adapt it for goats. And so now we have a source of goat milk. We still sell bottled milk the way that the old farm was doing, but any extra milk goes into cheese. So this is a 50-50 goat cow blend. And I like the combo because you get the goatiness, which is like it's like an interesting kind of like meaty, sometimes it reminds me of like chestnut honey flavor, buckwheat honey. It's a kind of almost like a leathery note in a way. It's goaty. It's like the only way to describe it. But the cow's milk brings you that richness. Goat's milk is really lean. It can be hard to make like a supple, rich textured cheese. So this cheese I think is a great, it has like a little caramely sweetness, really rich taste, very nutty. I think it's a lovely match with a pale ale, with a lighter bodied red wine, or with a bold white wine. So a lot of pairing possibilities. It's also excellent with cider. Cider and cheese is just so good together. So Michael's put together an awesome series of content for this month. If this is the first one that you've tuned in for, I highly encourage you to check out the other ones that he's put together. I'm going to do 2 more, one pairing chocolate and wine, and the other bourbon and some charcuterie. So we've got a lot of fun stuff coming down the pike. And you're also able to order a tasting set from Jasper Hill. That's going to be the same cheeses that we're going to use in different settings. So this was the story of Jasper Hill and the artisan cheese movement. And then in the pairing classes, we're really going to dive deep into the sensory properties of each cheese and pair them with other things. So you can pick up that tasting kit at jasperhillfarm.com/shop. And then there's a link to that specific tasting kit for these classes. So I'm so happy to be able to be here today to share the story of Jasper Hill and my love of cheese, obviously. And thanks for supporting American Cheese Month and American cheese producers all over the country. I hope you have a lot of fun tasting and learning more about it. Thank you so much, Michael, for having me.